Alrighty, so I posted on Twitter, which is never a good choice, and I got this reply. You know what, Zach? Sure. Why the hell not? Let's put 12 minutes on the clock and go. Okay, so in order to define the best or worst set, we should lay down some criteria. Now, the criteria I go by won't be qualitative because this is not a bean counting exercise, although there will almost certainly be plenty of beans to count, but that's not where we're going to start. First and foremost, are the cards and mechanics good? We're already wading way deep into subjective territory, but my frame of reference for whether the cards are good will be a sliding scale of whatever secondary market value I can recall from personal memory in tandem with tournament performance, and because we're factoring tournament performance, something like a card or set's impact on Commander will not be considered, which is fine, because Commander didn't exist in earnest till way after these sets were already out of print, and we're off to a great start already. Criteria number 2, are the cards and mechanics appealing? There's a lot of trusting your gut involved in this one, but the nice thing about your gut is that it is not an idiot. All right, quick aside. A card's appeal and its value above replacement are independent of each other. Here are 2 quick examples of a card that is appealing but kind of sucks, and a card that is really powerful but not very cool at all. Both happen all the time. Most of the time, the 2 are in lockstep, which makes more sense, but I promise these are independent variables. And lastly, how far along is the set in Magic's history? Plenty of deeply annoying 9-year-olds grow up to be perfectly pleasant adults. There's a lot of learning that happens between point A and point B. Same idea applies to making Magic cards. Alrighty. Now that the table's set, we can run through some honorable mentions, sets that often come up as the worst of all time, but can't really outdo Saviors of Kamigawa. These sets are all topics unto themselves, but I'll cover them briefly. First up is Chronicles, which is all reprints. And letting an all reprint set win this would be like letting a compilation album win a Grammy. All you need to know is that there were a ton of crazy things about Chronicles that would eventually all get walked back. It also resulted in the reserve list, which I guess is not going to get walked back, and that sucks shit for everyone. Next up is Homelands, which is very easily the worst set of all time if you only account for the power level of the cards. So, if the other Magic sets of the time had powerful cards that were perhaps a mana too cheap, every card in Homelands costs 1 mana more than it should. Okay, here's a Homelands card I picked entirely at random. It's a 5/5 flyer for 8 mana with no good abilities. It doesn't even regenerate itself. It is the 3rd most valuable card in the set. But Homelands, like Chronicles, occurs too early in Magic's history to be considered a legitimate contender for the worst. I mean, look, they were still making fucking Annie cards, okay? No one knew what they were doing. Fast forward a few years and you have the next honorable mention, Prophecy. Prophecy was printed when Magic's tentpole releases still followed the block structure. A big set to introduce the mechanics, a small set to expand on the space the mechanics offer, and a second small set for God only knows. Like Homelands, Prophecy looks gorgeous and contains 0 good cards, but unlike Homelands, Prophecy and the block it's in are a result of a calculated recalibration of the power level of Magic. Okay, so the block that came before, Urza Saga, contained the 3 most degenerate sets ever released in the post-standard era, which resulted in the former WotC CEO summoning R&D to his office and telling them in no uncertain terms that if anything like this happened in Magic again, that they'd all be shit-canned. Wanting very much to retain their dream jobs, the team set to work on Mercadian Masks block, which, as you may have guessed, sucked really badly. So yeah, Prophecy's pretty bad, but at least there's an explanation. The last honorable mention here is Cold Snap, and holy shit is Cold Snap a doozy. Its introduction to the public was cursed from the jump. with former lead developer and current channel fixture Randy Buehler publishing a blog post that positioned him as the Indiana Jones of Wizards of the Coast, stumbling on a long-lost sacred artifact, the mystical third set of the Ice Age block. Because, you see, Homelands was never intended to be in Ice Age block, so Homelands was retconned out of the block and replaced with Cold Snap. Obviously, Mark Rosewater had to walk all of this back, even though he doesn't really walk it back as much as he just registers his confusion that no one got his super funny joke. But at the end of the day, if the set had been halfway decent, all of this probably would have been fine. In reality, the set was horrible, bringing back the worst mechanics of 1995, coupled with a limited environment that in theory sounds kind of interesting to think about, but in practice was not fun at all, because the cards kind of sucked. But in terms of the ratio of useless cards to useful ones, Cold Snap couldn't hold a candle to Saviors of Kamigawa. Saviors is effectively identical to Homelands and Prophecy in terms of its impact on competitive play, but the difference is those sets are all the way back here. By the time Saviors rolled around, they're not putting anti-cards in sets by this point. They should have known better. Let's just set the scene. The year is 2005. The block prior, Mirrodin block, was overpowered and underdeveloped, and just like last time that happened, it resulted in an institutional power level recalibration that all but assured that the block that followed would suck real bad. Okay, well, Champions of Kamigawa didn't suck. It actually more or less laid the groundwork for how the game would evolve in the decades to come. Now, I don't know a ton about Commander, but I've watched enough game nights to know that it generally plays out like this. Players spend early turns developing their mana, sculpting their hands, and then the haymakers come out. And if you're old like me, this might remind you of the Kamigawa Block Pro Tour in 2005, where the top decks came with Rampant Growth, Cultivate, and then some humongous badass creatures. Champions of Kamigawa laid the blueprint for Commander as we know it, and before you say anything at all, I mean that as a compliment. I swear to God. Unfortunately, the rest of the block didn't live up to that precedent. In hindsight, Betrayers and Saviors feel pretty out of place, but Betrayers does have at least one good card, whereas Saviors has 0. All these cards. None of them good. But let's see how the set grades out based on our criteria. First, are the mechanics and cards good? Well, mostly no. But Saviors is where the channel mechanic first showed up, which effectively turns a card into a split card where you can either play the card as normal or channel it for some other effect. That's kind of fun. The channel cards from Neon Dynasty are more widely known, but the mechanic originates in Saviors of Kamigawa. This is the last reprintable mechanic we're going to see, so savor this moment in time. There's no going back. Hand size matters is a theme in Saviors of Kamigawa, and it informs the set's other two mechanics. The first one is Sweep, and in theory the idea is okay. The spell scales depending on how far into the game you are and how many lands of a single type you have. There are only 4 cards in Saviors with Sweep, and none of them are rare. 2 of them end the game on the spot, which is maybe fun the first 2 times, but doesn't have much replay value, while the other 2 are a removal spell and a Mind Twist, which are much different than the white Sweep cards, because not only will the game continue after the spell resolves, but said game is now guaranteed to suck because one player has no lands anymore. The last mechanic is Epic, which explicitly calls out that you can no longer play spells anymore. It exists in 1 cycle of rares and hasn't been seen again, and there's a reason for that. The deck building puzzle Epic presents can be compelling and even fun to think about, but at the end of the day, it plays like shit. The game's on rails, and nothing you draw really matters anymore. Sure, there are marginal things like creature lands or, hell, even alternate casting costs that you can draw to, but at the end of the day, once one of these things resolves, you are not playing Magic anymore. But how about the cards? Are any of those good? No. A recap of the playable cards in this set is laughably short, so let's just knock it out real quick. The aforementioned Enduring Ideal was its own deck in Standard for a time, but it was very bad and generally inadvisable to play. Governor Kataki and Manriki Gusari are firmly entrenched into Fairy's response territory for being extremely heavy-handed answers to something that was happening in Standard at the time it was printed. Promise of Bunrai is actually one of my favorite cards, and saw Standard play in Nantuko Husk decks once Guild Pack was released. Kami of the Crescent Moon and Ebony Owl Netsuke were cornerstones of a deck called Owling Mine, a deck that could never beat a Curd Ape in a million years, but nonetheless put 2 players in the top 8 of Pro Tour Honolulu. So the cards and mechanics are bad, but are they at least compelling? There are certainly compelling things to do here. The problem is they just suck too bad and have no replayability. Like, you're not getting anyone with this more than once. That one time is sweet, but that opponent is never going to 10 against you ever again for the rest of your life. Trust me, I know. Enduring Ideal, look, it is a fun deck building puzzle, but it's ultimately a massive trap, and playing it out still sucks, whether you're winning or losing. The best card in the entire set, the Chase Rare of Saviors of Kamigawa, is this. Unlike all the Drex surrounding it, Pithing Needle just works. You play it, and it does what it says it does. That being said, if this is the best card in your set, if that's the bar required to clear, that is a problem, because this stuff matters. The margins an LGS runs on are thinner than you realize, and if your local shop doesn't have other product lines to offset the balance, a set like Saviors of Kamigawa that generates virtually no demand can be ruinous, leaving stores with thousands of dollars in dead inventory. All right, how'd we do? Ho. We did pretty good. Not too shabby. Well, I hope this doesn't open me up to getting a ton of requests on Twitter for 12-minute videos. That'd be a real shame. Well, that's it for this time. Bye.